spoken about him on this show. Matt and I did a whole episode where if he ended up being a member of the Nebraska Cornhuskers and picking to play for his father's alma mater, what that would mean for the landscape of college football. Well, that doesn't play out. That doesn't end up happening. He ends up going with the shocking news here. He ends up picking the University of Georgia as his inevitable location. So, Matt, I want to kick it to you first because I know that we've spent a lot of time on Raiola and talking about him. First of all, like, are you at all surprised that this happened? Like, should we, any of us, be shocked that the best team in the country right now pulls the best quarterback in the upcoming recruiting class?
You said it right there, man. Best quarterback, best team. No surprise there. They got all the pieces to continue to have great success in the SEC. It's the greatest competition level in college football right now, too, which I think is always a bonus for anyone that's trying to play high-level sports and be a great competitor that way. Exciting news for Dylan. He's committed. That doesn't mean that it's a shoo-in, though, to end up that way, too, especially how we've seen volatile, things happen through the transfer portal with coaching changes. So right now he's got a great home. Kirby Smart, again, landed a great football player. And we'll see how this plays out in the next few weeks and throughout the season.
Yeah, I think that's a great note, Matt, is that, a verbal commitment is great but it only matters when you sign on the dotted line, obviously, in January. So, yeah, I mean, I think that for me, there's a two-pronged conversation here as far as the impacts. One is that Georgia just landed a guy who I consider the absolute best quarterback in the 2024 recruiting class. I mean, Dylan Raiola, 6'3", 220 pounds, strong arm, really good outside of structure. He is where the modern game is going, and he fits exactly what you want to see as far as your ability to ad-lib and win both inside and outside of structure. He is a modern quarterback, and I think he's a tremendous talent. Georgia has very quietly, recruited quarterback pretty well over the last couple years. I mean, they have Gunnar Stockton. They have Carson Beck, obviously, ready to start. They have gotten a couple guys that were borderline 5-star recruits over the last few years. Justin Fields. Well, I was going to say, Matt, is that you can make an argument, because this is my point, is that they've recruited well at quarterback, but Raiola is one step up from there, man. This is the best quarterback recruit that Georgia's had since at least Justin Fields, maybe since Matt Stafford. Like, I think you can make an argument. It's a very interesting and compelling argument, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So Georgia, a team that has won with a good quarterback over the last 2 years, who had a tremendous supporting cast, now has a quarterback that I think, if he's developed properly, could be a guy that elevates what's around him. And if you're elevating the talent that Georgia has already been bringing in, that's pretty dang scary, right? Like, it's very, very scary. So you got the best quarterback that you've gotten in several years. And I think for Georgia, it's just kind of continuing to be that team that is really pulling themselves to the top of the food chain. As far as it's been Georgia and Alabama, I think it's firmly Georgia after winning 2 straight national championships. Alabama fought back on the recruiting trail in 2023 and actually ended up with the number 1 class. But if you look at the momentum Georgia's building in 2024, I mean, they have several guys outside of Dylan Raiola, the Ryan Wingos of the world, the Jaden Riddells of the world, that are getting forecasted to end up at the University of Georgia. So I think this is Kirby Smart and this program, who's won 2 straight national championships, it's fight back to say, Alabama, you got us 1 year on the recruiting trail, but now we're going to separate ourselves in 2024, and we're going to continue to win football games. So it's a massive get for the Georgia Bulldogs.
I think one thing, too, I just want to bring up with this. So, like, all that is, obviously, it's massive for them to continue to pull top recruits like this. And they've always dominated the defensive side of the football, which we've talked about when we talked about the previous recruiting cycle. Them to now pull the top quarterback recruits, not just a 5-star, the top guy in the upcoming class, is pretty significant. But I do want to bring this up. We have noticed a trend, and it started a little bit with Quinn Ewers, and I think the argument for maybe it happening with Arch is something for us to monitor. Guys like Dylan Raiola, Quinn Ewers, that are the top quarterback recruits that don't play early on and don't get on the field early on, they tend to depart. They tend to leave. Justin Fields, that we brought up, was the highest rated quarterback recruit in a long time that picked the University of Georgia. He ends up hopping in the portal because he was frustrated with the situation with him and Jake Fromm, knowing that he's the more talented overall quarterback, that he headed to Ohio State. So I do bring up this possibility of Raiola doesn't end up going to Ohio State. He doesn't end up going to Nebraska, but I would consider both of those schools still in the mix for maybe after that freshman season. If he doesn't get into the mix to some level, he doesn't feel satisfied where he can maybe take over within the next year or so, he might not stick around. And I know that's something that Georgia fans don't want to hear, but it's certainly a possibility.
Well,
I don't see it. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead, Matt.
no, it's just
Go ahead,
with
Matt.
the age of the transfer portal and all that. Of course, we should expect to see that. I mean, if we have 50 Division One quarterbacks that are ranked a 3-star and above, you're going to guess that at least probably 25 of them are going to transfer within a year or two of that commitment. So it's going to be no shocker that way. I would say the one aspect of it that I really find interesting is, Mike Bobo and Brian McClendon now as the offensive coordinator / pass game coordinator. How does their dynamic play out replacing Todd Monken, the great success that he has an offensive coordinator? How does this offense look this season? And does that maybe, change the opinion of a Dylan Raiola and some of the other recruits that they're going at the quarterback position? So that'll be a big question mark too going into this football season.
I was going to say that I don't buy that actually, Joe, because yes, the transfer portal has made it so much easier for roster movement and guys to just get out quickly. But I think every situation that you're going to point to and say young gun that transfers after a year are on teams that didn't win a national championship, right? Georgia's a team that
That's
winning fixes everything. You know who didn't transfer after his freshman year as a backup? Bryce Young. You know why? Because they just won a championship in 2020. Like, I think that winning calms those let's jump and let's just leave, right? Jake Fromm didn't win a championship at Georgia. If he had that year, I bet that Justin Fields would have been more inclined to be like, you know what? I'm going to stick this guy out a little bit because we're winning national championships and Jake Fromm's pretty good. But I really think that as long as winning happens, which Georgia's shown, they're going to win a lot of football games. I think winning calms down that jumping. And I think that's usually why you don't see a lot of movement at some of the top schools as far as people transferring out, because they're like, we're winning games, right? Like, this is a winning formula. This isn't like you're an idiot. We're losing football games because I'm not playing. You're literally winning football games. So I think that can kind of calm some of the transfer stuff.
And it is a good point as well. If you look at it from the Mark Sanchez, Jesse Palmer, all those guys at the USC at the time. And then there's Matt Castle, who's a guy that's like in the wings waiting to play. It was almost better for him to be a backup at USC and practice against USC every football day than it was to actually transfer and be a starter at another school. So it worked out well for him. So being in these programs that are winning, that are coached well, waiting your time like, a past generation always did, right? Because of the stipulations of transferring and all that. But it is an interesting dynamic. And right now, he's in a good situation. Georgia's doing the right thing. They're recruiting as many good football players as they can. And unfortunately, they know they can't make everybody happy. And there always is going to be that aspect of the personal relationship with the players and coaches. And sometimes it doesn't always mesh. And we have to kind of keep that in mind, too, that these are young men working in a new world with, grown men at the coaching world. And sometimes, those relationships just don't collide. Even though they went great on the recruiting trip, that doesn't mean that it's going to be harmonious when the actual season begins.